The views and opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily those of this station, JVC Broadcasting Management, or its sponsors.
Welcome to Crime and Justice Radio, where we talk all things crime, justice, mayhem, and the courts with expert insiders and legal outcasts. My name is Aida Leisenring. I'm your host, along with my co-host, Mr. Bruce Barquette, who turned a year older yesterday. Happy birthday.
Thank you very much. I hope to keep doing that for many, many years to come. But more important than my birthday was today's birthday celebration, which is youngest daughter, Maggie, very special girl, Maggie, as I like to say to her when I'm in her presence, turned 9 today. Wonderful little girl. Nonverbal. She has Down syndrome, but is the light of every room she walks into. I passed around a picture in the office today, and one person said her smile is contagious, and it has been that way for the last 9 years. One of the luckiest moments of our lives was having Maggie come into it. We have 3 other children, all of whom are home and hopefully listening to the show like they do every week. Happy birthday, Maggie. See you in a little while.
And the picture of Maggie was beautiful. I was hoping to crop it because you also appeared in a muscle shirt.
It wasn't a muscle shirt. It was an old Yes shirt from a concert I attended many, many years ago.
And I asked if you posted that on Facebook, and that's what shut it down.
I did not, and it did not.
But actually, every time Maggie turns a year older, I'm reminded about how long I've been at Barquette Epstein. Prior to working with you, I was a public defender. And as a public defender, I was confined, so to speak, to one county. I worked in Brooklyn. For 6 years in a row, I was going to Brooklyn Criminal Court and Brooklyn Supreme Court, trying cases, getting to know all the judges, all the prosecutors. And there's a procedure about it. You know, eventually it becomes like clockwork. You don't think about what is this judge's procedure in this courtroom. And I was getting ready to go to work, and I think it had been 2 or 3 days that I started working at Barquette Epstein. And you called me and you said, hey, little bit of news, and I kind of need a favor. My daughter Maggie was born this morning, so I can't go to court. Will you go to Suffolk for me? Which at the time for me was 2 hours away because I lived in Manhattan. I was already running late. I didn't know much about the case, much about the client, and I knew nothing about the court. And I remember walking into the building, going to the courtroom. The courtroom was empty as I waited, and I thought, where are all the lawyers? Am I the first person to be here? And eventually a court officer said, what are you doing? Everyone's in chambers having coffee, talking about your cases.
That's what
So
they
I
do.
ran back and I said, wow, this is kind of old school. We would never go back to chambers in Brooklyn. We did everything on the record.
Welcome to suburbia. Suffolk is a very congenial place. Even judges with whom I've had unbelievably bitter fights with in the courtroom will offer up a cup of coffee and even a bagel from time to time as we chat about the case back in chambers.
And kind of an off-cuff, not on the record opinion about your case, which is insightful and good to know.
But you do that. And look, we're going to have a judge on, not from Suffolk, but a retired judge from Nassau County, David Ayers, who's going to join us in the second half to kind of give us the inside scoop of what it's like to be a judge, what it's like to preside over murder cases, to sit in a courtroom with attorneys fighting and screaming at each other, and provide some insight I don't think people will hear anyplace else. A real candid discussion about life on the bench of a busy suburban criminal court handling all kinds of felonies.
And I kind of call this our abuse of power or politics in the court, if you will, not with respect to the Honorable David Ayres.
Of course not.
But I say that because I want to talk a little about what's going on in Julius Jones's case.
But before you do that, I want to give you a chance for a point of
I'm getting there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Well,
Thanks for guiding me.
I thought you skipped it.
My lord. I know you're a lot older than me.
Indeed, I am, but I'm looking at this sheet, and I thought you skipped it.
No, I'm not.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I think what we do as defense lawyers is try to prevent the abuse of power by district attorneys, by judges, and frankly, by bad press and the trials that happen in the media. And we're going to talk a little about what's going on with Julius Jones. I want to discuss what happened to Monica Lewinsky, because there's this amazing American crime story segment called Impeachment. But I want to start off with talking about the public defender. I was a public defender, and I was fortunate enough to follow in my aunt's footsteps. I'm not going to name her by name because she was one of the most humble, non-braggy people that didn't want anyone to make a fuss about her accomplishments. But my aunt graduated in the 70s from law school, and she went to work as an assistant public defender in the city of St. Louis. And during her 10-year tenure, she tried capital murder and death penalty cases and became a supervising attorney and member of the training and hiring committee. Among those she hired was a young lawyer named Ronnie L. White, who later became a judge of the Missouri Supreme Court and is now U.S. District Court judge in St. Louis. She trained a number of other now well-known former students who are fantastic lawyers. And when she and a colleague had children, which would be my lovely cousins, who I got to see this weekend, they were held in such high respect that she persuaded her boss and the presiding judge to modify the criminal trial assignment calendar to accommodate their parenting duties, a historic first. And later on, as she spent more time at home with her children, she continued to tutor and mentor students at-risk neighborhoods and still take on pro bono cases, which often resulted in the landline receiving calls from penitentiaries, collect calls. We celebrated her memorial this weekend and gathered as a family in her honor. And when you hear the stories behind her career and just all her achievements, they're quite incredible. And she never bragged, and she never wanted the attention. So I'm raising a glass to her, raising a glass to the public defender who fights for those accused who have no money, don't have the skill set or potentially the education to defend themselves. And today we're going to talk about how hard it is to go up against those who are in power. So
Amen. Here's to your aunt. Being a woman and being in law school in the 70s was no joke. For people who don't realize that. She's what do they say? Breaking a path, trailblazer. Good for her.
Trailblazer, for sure. Now, for those who have not been keeping up with Julius Jones, his case has gotten national attention from high-profile politicians, celebrities, athletes alike. Something historic happened. He's been on death row for 22 years, and he has a very compelling innocence claim. And they had a clemency hearing on his behalf, which was the first time ever the Oklahoma Parole Board held a clemency hearing for a death row inmate. And his incredible lawyers didn't argue what one would typically argue at a clemency hearing, which is remorse. They argued actual innocence. And the parole board uniquely voted 3-4, which is all they needed, to commute his death sentence to life with parole, because they said they had doubts. And when it comes to executions, one ought never to have any doubts. So
they voted technically to recommend that his sentence be commuted, because it's still up to the governor as to whether or not that happens. He has an execution date for October 28th.
It's November 18th. Oklahoma is rated the third highest state for executions, by the way, and they are resuming. And the district attorney and we spoke a little about this last week, the district attorney in Oklahoma City is irate about this recommendation, and he's doing everything in his power to prevent that recommendation from going through. what he's done is he's convened a county grand jury to investigate alleged credible allegations involving official corruption of parole board members. And the grand jury will be given power to issue subpoenas, investigate, and charge by indictment and make accusations for removal of these very parole board members. And get this, who did the district attorney recruit? None other but Judge Ray Elliott, who agreed to convene the grand jury at D.A. Prater's request. Now, why is that important? Because Judge Ray Elliott is married to the very prosecutor that argued at the clemency hearing
for his execution.
Exactly.
That is just, you want to say unbelievable, but it's going on in plain sight, in front of our eyes.
Everywhere.
Well, everywhere. But stop for a second and think about this. The Pardon and Parole Commission, no liberal bastion is that, right? These are people that routinely deny parole and commutations to inmates to come before them. They regularly rubber stamp whatever the sentence had been. And here they said, we have doubts about this man's guilt. Not doubts about whether or not he should be executed, but doubts about his actual guilt. And they did it from all apparent appearances from their own conscience. And the prosecutor who argued for the execution of Julius Jones, her husband, then authorizes an investigation into these people because they didn't like the result.
And from what I understand, he might actually be presenting the matter to the grand jury and conducting the actual investigation. So we need good lawyers, and Julius Jones's defense team are terrific to keep up the good fight and check these abuses of power. Even here, Governor Kevin Stitt called Prater's request the latest political stunt to intimidate the Pardon and Parole Board and obstruct the constitutional process as high-profile cases that his office prosecuted are being considered.
It is. It's one. Look, I know it's taking place in Oklahoma, but this is a man's life at stake. It's easy enough to read about Julius Jones going online, and as I've mentioned many times before, listeners know this. This case became a national story because of you. Because you and another individual got Viola Davis to co-executive produce a TV series on ABC called The Last Defense that featured Julius Jones's case. And from that, you've gotten he's gotten unbelievable public support. And it's a great legal team that was able to successfully argue before the Pardon and Parole Commission board. So good for you again.
And speaking of television series that focus on crime and justice, The Last Defense was a docu-series, but I watched what I guess one would call a made-for-TV movie, but really it's a TV series called The American Crime Story Impeachment. And it's a series that recounts the Bill Clinton, Monica Lewinsky scandal.
Well, let's review that for a second.
Break it down for our younger listeners.
So Monica Lewinsky was a young intern in the Clinton administration, actually in the White House. And there was a government shutdown. The Republicans refused to fund the government for whatever reason, so everybody was furloughed. There was really nobody in the White House. But the president was still there. He still went to the Oval Office. And apparently Monica did too. And they had, by all accounts, a sexual encounter or sexual encounters, more than one. And Bill Clinton was also being investigated by independent counsel at the time who was supposed to be looking at his and Hillary's stock deals out of the Whitewater stock deal back in Arkansas from years before that. And somehow they got wind of the fact that Paula Jones was suing Clinton for some kind of sexual harassment also when he was governor of Arkansas. And they leaked to the lawyers for Paula Jones that he was having this affair with Monica Lewinsky, and they asked him about it in the deposition. And as a result of that question, he denied it. The independent counsel somehow got involved in this and went and spoke to Monica Lewinsky.
But here's what I didn't know, right? Because I forget how old I was. I was young. I was either in high school or college, and for me, I wasn't quite politically involved, so it was like the female Super Bowl. Like I was watching the impeachment proceedings with popcorn in my living room, not realizing
you didn't
that
have much of a life in high school or college, did you?
Come on, that was the biggest thing that was happening in America at the time. It was historic. And I didn't appreciate quite what Monica Lewinsky went through other than the public shaming that she didn't deserve. And as Amanda Knox points out, why is this always called the Monica Lewinsky scandal? It should be called the Bill Clinton affair, right? Why do we focus on her? But what I didn't realize, speaking of abuse of power, is that she was physically seized by the FBI, placed into a room, questioned, threatened with imprisonment, despite the fact that she never broke any law. And arguably was the victim in all of this. And she had indicated, because she was educated, and she asked the innocent question, well, can I get a lawyer first? And they said, oh, you can do that. But if you don't cooperate with us now without a lawyer, it could end up resulting in your imprisonment, or you could be in a lot of trouble. So she sat there unprotected, unadvised, and terrified, and confessed to stuff that really she didn't have to confess. She wasn't under court order. She wasn't, I don't think at the time there was a grand jury subpoena. And it was, political hack job.
Even if there was, and what you ended up doing there, or what they ended up doing, is questioning a young woman and forcing her to tell them about her illicit affair with a married man, a married president, in order to bring impeachment charges against him for lying to in a federal deposition. He shouldn't have lied. He shouldn't have had the affair. All of it was wrong. But the degree to which the special prosecutors went to get her to cooperate seems, dare I say, excessive.
And for what? What did it do? What did it accomplish?
Well, I'll tell you what I think it accomplished. I think you look for where the polarization of our political process began, and I think it began with the hatred of Bill Clinton in the mid-1990s, and this cut down all the rules, cut down all the laws to get at Clinton that infuriated the left, and the right was crazy to go after him. I mean, not just made a mistake going after him, they went after him with every bit of firepower they could get. They didn't get him. And then Bush came in, was a reaction to that. And we've gone back and forth over the last 25 years, I think in part because of that.
The movie credits Ann Coulter with having the brilliant decision to catch him lying under deposition. But I don't know. I don't know what's true or not
look,
in terms of the fact.
There's another aspect to the politicalization or the polarization of our politics, which has been the appointment of political judges. And you see it in the abortion case now. You see it in death penalty cases. You see it in other cases where both sides are just picking ideologues to be on the court. And it's obliterated the credibility of the Supreme Court because nobody believes that the judges are making decisions based upon an objective review of case law and statutes and the Constitution. Everyone believes that the judges are making decisions based upon their own political persuasion. So you have the right picking the most conservative judges they can find, and now you have Joe Biden picking the most liberal judges he can find.
Who did he recently pick?
Well, he made 53 appointments so far. Many of them, and I don't want to disparage them individually, but many of them clearly are far left in their politics. People that were part of the ACLU, and I like the ACLU in many respects. We work with them. We've worked with them in the past. But you can't pick ideologues. If you do, you end up having the public lose respect for the law, and all it becomes is power. I'm the judge. I can do what I want. I'm going to vote this way. You have to listen.
Right. The law is supposed to work for the people, not for the political party.
And there's supposed to be some objectivity to it. And there's no objectivity to it if the Democrats view it one way and the Republicans view it the other way. And the only way you get a ruling is you get more of your people on the court than the other side.
So what do you think of our current Supreme Court? And they're resuming in-person oral arguments very soon.
I think that it's stacked with very, very conservative judges who are going to make rulings that are going to be overturned as we go forward by very, very liberal judges that will be stacked with the next president who gets that opportunity. They're all young, so they're going to be there for a while. But the pendulum swings. Sometimes it swings slowly, but it'll swing back, and the Republicans will regret the day they did that. So we're going to speak to Judge David Ayres in a few seconds.
I feel like we should raise judges from birth to be apolitical and put them in a little bubble, not let them hear the media and see what's going on politically, and just sort of raise these like sacrificial children to be objective judges that follow the law and,
have bipartisan support for them. I mean, it's not hard to do this. We should have this. We shouldn't have judges where you can predict the outcome of their cases based upon the political party that appointed them.
We'll be back with a wonderful judge to weigh in on exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah, you want to bet?
David Ayres. Welcome back to Crime and Justice Radio. I'm your host, Aida Leisenring, along with co-host Bruce Barquette. And we have, and are honored to have, Honorable David Ayres, who is managing partner at Barquette Epstein, where, in addition to overseeing the firm's day-to-day operations, he represents clients in state and federal court. Judge Ayres earned his law degree from Hofstra in '93 and immediately went to work for the district attorney's office in Nassau County. He then spent 6 years as the principal law clerk to a Nassau County judge until 2003, when he was elected to the Nassau County Court. And at 37 years old, he was the youngest person elected to a countywide judgeship in Nassau County. He served for 10 years as a county court judge and acting Supreme Court justice. And during his tenure in criminal term, he presided over more than 100 felony criminal jury trials and thousands of pretrial proceedings. Judge Ayres also has experience as an acting family court judge, where he presided over matrimonial and civil matters in the New York State Supreme Court system. He also presided over the Mental Hygiene Court, the Integrated Domestic Violence Court, and was selected to help establish and preside over the first sex offense court created in New York State. Welcome, Judge David Ayres. How you doing?
Well, thank you very much. I very much appreciate you inviting me on.
We're happy to have you. How you doing?
Doing fine, thank you.
And I have a burning question I ought to really just ask you in the hallway, but it gets me from time to time as a defense lawyer when I'm up in front of a judge, especially a judge I've never met. I always wonder if they prefer judge or your honor. And I feel like judge can sound dismissive and your honor can sound like I'm, trying to be a brown noser. Do you have any personal preference?
I think it kind of just depends on the moment and depends on the syntax of the particular sentence that you're using. But it's kind of interchangeable. I wasn't offended by either one. If somebody was using it in a way that I found it to be snide or disrespectful, then I would get upset by it. But I could live with either one.
So, look, we want to get your insight into what it was like to sit on a trial court bench, busy bench. You tried hundreds of cases. In other words, you presided over hundreds of trials. One of the busiest judges in the county while you were there, and sat on murder cases, drug cases, robberies, rapes, and so forth. What was it like? I mean, you're an advocate now. You're an advocate as a prosecutor. What was it like to sit between two parties that were bitterly fighting with each other in your courtroom?
It was, a unique perspective for sure, but it's, I tried to measure myself by, simply knowing my role and not trying to step outside of the role. There in every courtroom, there are people who are there to do a certain job, and a judge is no different than an advocate on one side or the other. A judge has a job to do, and the job is to keep everything moving along and keep it moving along fairly, and make sure that people are abiding by the rules with respect to decorum, evidence, and everything else in between. But it's just another role in the courtroom, no different than the court reporter taking down the words, or a court officer protecting everybody in the courtroom.
Have you ever held anyone in contempt? I'm just curious.
I did in family court, not in criminal court. I came close a couple of times, and people don't understand. It's not as easy as, oh, you just called me a bad name and now I'm going to hold you in contempt. There's really sort of a more intricate process involved with it, and it sometimes, it's just better to hit yourself in the ankle with your gavel and ride out whatever it is that's motivating you to want to do that at that moment. But yeah, I did do it once in family court.
Now, the family court proceedings are much different than the criminal court proceedings. Which was more difficult to preside over, a homicide case or a custody fight?
I think that the family court experience for me was more difficult, only because I kind of felt like I got dropped behind enemy lines at some point in a country that I didn't know the language of, and I couldn't understand all the machinations, and it was sort of a sharper learning curve for me. My experience to that point had been strictly criminal court, and either in Hempstead or Mineola. And this was really a different thing in every way, in terms of the litigants, in terms of the size of the courtrooms, in terms of the issues that you were dealing with, in terms of the defense bar. It was just really different. So, it's not like the issues were terribly complicated. It was just having to train your brain to think and look at things differently. It also came right at the outset of my judicial career, so I was also learning that role of neutral arbiter, which was kind of new under those circumstances, although I had come from a law secretary position that kind of gave me that taste. You sit on that bench for yourself, by yourself, for yourself for the first time, and it's a different experience. But it was a little tougher there just because it was a little bit of a different language at first.
And it's, I've always said, give me your worst, accused criminal defendant, and I still feel like it's a more civilized meet and greet than it is in family court when it comes to parents divorcing and fighting over custody. I did one such case and was ready to quit the practice. So I commend you for doing all of them.
Yeah, out in the hallways in family court is a different experience than in the courtroom. I have appeared in family court a lot as a litigant since I left the bench, and it's a different world out in the hallway as opposed to when you come in the courtroom. The rules of decorum, the rules of the courtroom still apply in family court, and I expected people to abide by them. But I hear you when you're talking about what goes on in the hallways. There is nobody happy in family court ever, it seems like. So that's really a different animal entirely.
Was there one case in particular that stuck out in your mind that either haunted you or you were satisfied with, or that you really remember? In
the entirety of my career, or are you speaking about family court?
Family court or criminal court.
There are, listen, it's hard. I dealt with a lot of terrible cases, horrific murders, and from awful DWI-related accidents with multiple fatalities to intentional murders and dismemberments and terrible things. And it's hard to forget. It's hard to put out of your mind some of the pieces of those uglier cases just because they are so ugly. And those are the ones that stuck with me. I find though that I'm able to, if I hear a name out of the blue, sometimes a client will come in or somebody will mention a name and say, "Hey, do you remember that case?" And I find that I remember it. And sometimes those cases are the less, I don't want to say glamorous, or the less, what you would think would be the less memorable cases. And it might be a case involving a young person who got into, made their first mistake and it was a terrible mistake. And those are the ones you're not exactly sure how to resolve or what the best outcome would be for that particular case. So those kind of stick with me more in a more significant way, I think, than the gory and sort of horrible cases do.
I was kind of thinking of like an emotional case or a case that you felt went the wrong way, perhaps. In other words, for whatever reason, you thought the verdict should have gone one way and it went another? I made it a habit of never getting invested in what verdicts were, because I can't, you have very little control over it, and the control that you do have, you want to sort of hand out in an even-handed way. So I did try a case right toward the end of my career that was a cold case homicide from over in Westbury, Newcastle, from the early 1980s. And a fellow was connected to it by DNA evidence some 20 years after the fact. He ended up walking out of the courtroom with a not guilty verdict. And I mean, literally walking out of the courtroom. They released him from the courtroom, and he walked out the back door into the rotunda of the county courthouse, into where the family of the decedent was, with their T-shirts and posters. And that was a surreal experience. But as far as jurors, I would talk to juries every trial that I presided over. I would have the jurors come back into my office, into my chambers afterwards to spend a couple of minutes with them, speak to them, answer questions that they invariably had. And always the first thing that they would ask me was, did we do the right thing? And I would purposely, I said, my answer was always the same. It was, you did the right thing, because you came in here and you served as a juror and you rendered a verdict. And as far as what I think about the outcome, again, it's not my role. It's not my job. I tell them that in my jury charge, and I honestly believe that. It is not my role to become invested in the outcomes of these trials. It's impossible to do psychologically, and it's not good to do as a practice in terms of being a neutral arbiter. Look, for people who try cases and have been around trials, when the verdict comes in, and it happens to me even when I'm watching TV, it's just kind of a Pavlovian response. I get knots in my stomach. I don't like it. I turn off Law and Order when the verdict is about to be read, because I just don't want to go through that process.
You kind of know what it is in Law and Order.
Yeah, you kind of do, but still, it's the same feeling. Did you get that feeling? I mean, you tried cases as an attorney. Did you get that feeling that the court officers come in and say there's a verdict, and you're walking out, and the whole feel of the courtroom is different, right? There's more court officers involved. Everybody's quiet. Nobody's joking. You can hear a pin drop. What was your reaction to all that as a judge?
Well, I was happy that we were at the end, because a big part of a judge's job is to see a case through to conclusion and to avoid the brush fires and potholes that break out along the way, and just try to get the case done so you don't have to do it again. You don't have to bring these witnesses and put these witnesses through it a second time. So I was relieved in the sense that there was a verdict. I honestly didn't care. I'd say probably 99% of the time, I honestly didn't care what the verdict ended up being. And I could always ruin the suspense for myself by looking ahead of time, which I tried not to do also. But
what do you mean looking ahead of time?
Could you predict what the outcome was going to be?
Go back. What do you mean looking ahead of time?
When the jury sends me a note and says we have reached a verdict, they also have a second sheet of paper, which is a verdict sheet that's in the envelope, the same one or a separate one.
Come on.
Expert insider, stuff we didn't know.
Come on, I've been trying cases for 35 years. I thought there was a note that said we've reached a verdict, and then they carry in the envelope with the verdict.
They do.
But you get that before the court gets that before the lawyers see the jury walk in?
I can say the clerk will say, do you have a verdict? Yes, I do. Please hand up the verdict sheet.
Yeah.
She will hand it to me. And I have the option to look at it or not look at it. I would always look at it because it had to be filled out right. So if I saw a problem in terms of what they've filled out the verdict sheet wrong, or they considered a lesson that they shouldn't have or something, I needed to fix that beforehand. I couldn't fix that after the genie was out of the bottle. So I always wanted to look at it ahead of time for that. And trying to do so with a straight face, it's not an easy thing to do.
That's remarkable. And I gather, the sergeant that's walking that note over to you, or the clerk, also, has to deal with the temptation of looking or not looking. So he or she might know.
Absolutely. And there's, there's a lot of the machinations that go on about, are they close? They've been out for a day. They've been out for 2 days, and you kind of get a sense, I think they're getting close. I think they're, okay. I don't want, don't tell me how I know that. Don't tell me how you want to know that. I just, sort of, there's certain things that go on in the ecosystem that sort of give you a little sense of where you're headed.
And I'm curious, and I've gotten different answers from different folks that work in the court system. But do you over the years, you've obviously heard from jurors, looked at jurors, observed them. Do you have any indication of how it is that they choose? Is it often they don't like a certain lawyer, or they appreciate the presentation better of the other individual?
Listen, you mean how they come to a particular verdict?
Right. And obviously they review the evidence, they study the evidence, but supposedly, humanity is humanity. So I imagine if they hate the prosecutor, they might lean towards the defense, or vice versa.
Absolutely. There is a human element, like in any social interaction that you have. And as much as you try to explain to them that, listen, whether you like me, you don't like me, you hear attorneys, prosecutors, or defense attorneys saying that all the time, don't take it out on my client. It's nonsense. Jurors tap into things that they like and things that they don't like, and the demeanor and the decorum of a particular attorney. What I found most striking was jurors would get angry at attorneys who apparently got angry at me. I found that to happen a lot. That if it appeared that an attorney was being disrespectful to the court, jurors would get pissed off about that. And not that it would be the deciding factor, but it is an absolute real factor that jurors see everything, know everything, would pick out foibles of a particular attorney, or like doing
the tattoo on their leg, what they were wearing today.
Yeah. I mean, not so much wearing, but rolling their eyes at an inappropriate moment. The things that they would pick up on would always shock me, and I'd be like, wow, you saw that? That's something that was on your radar? Well, I'm telling you.
I totally hear that. I had a sex offense case that John LaTurco and I tried, and the prosecutor was perceived by the jury to be very flirtatious with the judge and giggle and laugh as if they had this prior connection. And the jury ultimately punished her for it and respected me for not doing the same. So
try to balance out the power in the room by saying, you guys shouldn't be doing this, and we're going to hold it against you and side with the defendant for doing so. So you see that kind of equilibrium happening in trials all the time.
How one of the things that you have to do as a judge, obviously, is sentence people. And you sentence people after murder cases. And part of the procedure is to hear from the victim's family. They have an opportunity in New York to speak to the court and ask the court to impose a sentence. What was dealing with families like in murder cases?
Well, I mean, at the ultimate end of the case, in the speaking to the doing a victim impact statement, that's sort of the end of the line as far as their input. I would be involved to the extent that I could be in certain cases with the approval of the parties, involved with speaking to families about cases before they resolve themselves sometimes, in an effort to try to resolve them in a positive way.
In what way? Describe what you mean. What do you mean you deal with the families?
I had a very high-profile murder case where there was going to be an offer extended by the prosecutor that I wasn't entirely comfortable with, getting on board with. And I wanted the opportunity to speak to the family myself and look them in the eye and explain to them, or to explain to them what the offer was and to gauge their reaction to it. Even though I had a preview from the prosecutor saying that, listen, we wouldn't offer this if they weren't on board. On board to me is a sort of a subjective term, and I wanted to look them in the eye and understand exactly why they were on board or what they thought they were on board for. So I got the prosecutor and the defense attorney to agree to allow me to have them in my chambers and to speak to them. I spent hours or more with the entire family, heard them out, let them hear me out. So there is interaction with the family in that context, obviously with the approval of the parties. But in the more traditional context that you speak about, the victim impact portion of it, remember, it doesn't happen a ton. Sometimes you have victimless crimes where people don't want to come in and talk, or even if you have a victim, they don't want to talk. But it's a big part of it. It's tough. When you talk about getting emotional and trying to keep it together as a judge, like I think the last thing people want to see is a judge getting overcome with emotion.
If the judge starts weeping, then we're in trouble. Right. I tell my client, here's a passport to Mexico, buddy. No, I'm kidding.
I'm wrapping myself in the ankle with my gavel to try to keep my emotion in check. That's a real thing. My ankle has the scars to prove it, I'm telling you. Because it's tough sometimes to listen to what these people meant, the T-shirts that they're wearing, the buttons that they're wearing. That's a hard thing.
And we all have to remember that these are individuals who lost a loved one, a son, a daughter, a mother, spouse, to a homicide. Right. So their emotions are raw as can be. One last question. You've been a defense attorney, a judge, and a prosecutor.
Nope.
What do you mean, nope?
Nope. I want to...
No, go ahead. You can ask me. I know what you're going to ask me.
Go ahead. Well, which one's your favorite? You got 30 seconds.
I don't have a favorite. It's like my children. I like.
Oh, come on! I'm the favorite.
Bad things and other things about them, but what I like to do, what sustains me, is trying to help people. Whether you're a public servant or a private servant, it doesn't really matter. You have a job to do.
Well, look, we're not just sucking up to our managing partner. You were a great judge. You're an outstanding lawyer. Happy to have you as part of our firm.
And you're fun to work with.
And you're more fun than people want to bet.
And did we have a conflict of interest discussion before I came on just to discuss that I was, in fact, employed by the firm?
No. It's over now. Show's over. Music's playing. We're done. Now it's just you and us talking.
I did announce you as Barkett Epstein.
Managing partner. We're all good. Good job, Dave. Thank you very much. That's fascinating.
All right. You got it, guys.
The views and opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily those of this station, JVC Broadcasting Management, or its sponsors.